The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as the emergency broadcast pierced through every communication channel in the known systems. Admiral Vextar of the Krillian Empire stood frozen at his command podium, and his 4 eyes widened as the translation matrix decoded the human transmission. "This is Captain Daniel Hayes of the Earth Defense Force Battleship Vengeance, and you have 72 hours to withdraw all military presence from the Outer Rim colonies, and this is your only warning." The voice was calm, but carried a weight that made several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Counselor Zephyrim towered over the assembly floor, and his reptilian features twisted into what passed for a smile among the Sauron collective. "A single human vessel dares to threaten the combined might of 16 species, and their arrogance knows no bounds." His hissing laugh echoed through the chamber, and several other counselors joined in with their own expressions of amusement. The idea that one ship could pose any threat to the council seemed absurd to most of them. Ambassador Lyra stood apart from the others, and her crystalline form shimmered with concern rather than amusement. "Perhaps we should reconsider, and the humans have been quiet for 3 years since the border skirmishes. And why would they risk open war now?" Her voice was soft but insistent, and she looked around the chamber hoping to find support for her caution. She found none. The other counselors dismissed her concerns, with waves of hands and tentacles, and clicks of mandibles. Admiral Vextar pulled up the tactical display, and the holographic image showed the human ship's trajectory, heading straight for the nexus point where all council fleets converged for strategic operations. A single battleship, and even if it is one of their larger vessels, our fleet at the nexus numbers over 300 warships, and this is suicide. He spoke with absolute confidence, and his military experience told him that no single vessel could stand against such overwhelming numbers. The Council had faced rebellions before, and they had always crushed them with superior firepower. Commander Thruck of the Brutarian Legion slammed his massive fist on the console, and the sound reverberated through the chamber like thunder. "Then let them come, and we will make an example of this human captain and his crew, and let it serve as a reminder to Earth that they are not welcome in our territory." The Brutarians were a warrior race, and they took pride in their military prowess, and the thought of backing down from a fight was unthinkable to them. Several other military representatives voiced their agreement, and the chamber filled with aggressive posturing. The council voted unanimously without a single voice of dissent. The human ship would be destroyed on sight, and there would be no negotiations, and no mercy would be shown. They saw this as an opportunity to remind the younger species of the galaxy, who held real power. Earth had been tolerated as a minor player, but this blatant challenge could not go unanswered. The order went out across all military channels, and every council warship in the region began moving toward the nexus point. On the bridge of the Vengeance Captain, Daniel Hayes stood with his hands clasped behind his back and watched the countdown timer tick away the hours. His executive officer, Commander Lisa Morgan, approached with a datapad in her hands, and her footsteps were quiet on the metal deck. "All systems are green, Captain, and the crew is ready, and engineering reports the new reactor is operating at 112% efficiency." She handed him the datapad, but he barely glanced at it, and his eyes remained fixed on the view screen showing the star field. "Ahead. How many ships are waiting for us at the nexus?" Daniel's voice was calm and measured, and it showed no sign of the tension that must have been building inside him. Lisa consulted her datapad and pulled up the latest intelligence reports that had been gathered by long-range sensors and deep space monitoring stations. "Latest intel suggests 347, sir, and they have cruisers and destroyers and carriers, and the Council has assembled quite the welcoming party." She watched his face for any reaction, but his expression remained unreadable. "Good, and we would not want them to think we are not worth the effort." A slight smile crossed Daniel's face, and it was not a pleasant smile, but rather the expression of a man who had been waiting 3 long years for this moment. Lisa hesitated before speaking again, and her concern for the crew evident in her voice. "Sir, with all due respect, those are impossible odds, and even with our upgrades, we are still one ship against their entire fleet." She had served with Daniel for 5 years, and she trusted his judgment, but this seemed like madness. Daniel turned to face her, and his gray eyes were hard as steel and filled with a cold determination that sent a chill down her spine. "Lisa, do you know why they call this ship the Vengeance?" She nodded slowly and answered in a quiet voice. "Because of what happened at Colony 7, sir." "That is right, and 3 years ago the Council obliterated an entire human settlement. and they killed men and women and children, and 200,000 people were wiped out in an afternoon, and they did it to send us a message. He paused and his jaw tightened with barely controlled rage. Now it is our turn to send one back, and I promise you that after today they will never forget what happens when you anger humanity. In the lower decks, the crew prepared with quiet determination, and each person focused on their assigned tasks. Lieutenant Greg Sanders checked the loading mechanisms on the railgun batteries for the 5th time, and his hands moved with practiced efficiency. Each projectile weighed 3 tons and would be accelerated to a fraction of light speed, and the kinetic energy alone could crack a planet. Petty Officer Kate Williams was securing the ammunition feeds nearby, and she noticed his repeated checks. Nervous. Her question was simple, but understanding terrified. Greg admitted without shame, and there was no point in lying to a fellow crew member who might die beside him in the coming hours. But also ready, and those council bastards need to learn that humans do not forgive, and we sure as hell do not forget. Kate nodded in agreement, and her own hands were steady despite the fear they all felt. Her aunt had died at Colony 7, and this mission was personal for many of the crew members aboard the Vengeance. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Paul Martinez monitored the new experimental reactor, and dozens of displays showed power levels and containment field strength and fuel consumption rates. It was built on reverse-engineered alien technology, but improved with human innovation, and powered by something the Council had never seen before, which was a controlled singularity core. The power output was beyond anything previously thought possible, and it gave the Vengeance capabilities that would surprise their enemies. Chief, the containment field is holding steady. Technician Amy Ross reported from her station, and her young face was illuminated by the soft glow of her monitors. But if we push past 120%, we are in uncharted territory. She had run the simulations dozens of times, and the theoretical model suggested the reactor could handle more, but theory and reality were not always the same thing. Paul grinned like a man who enjoyed taking calculated risks. Amy, we have been in uncharted territory since the moment we left Earth, and when the captain gives the order, we will give him every ounce of power this beast can generate. He patted the main reactor console affectionately, and the massive machine hummed with barely contained energy. The singularity at its core was stable for now, but pushing it too hard could turn them all into a black hole. Back on the bridge, Daniel watched as the timer reached the final hour, and the tension among the crew was palpable. The communications officer, Ensign Chris Taylor, looked up from his station with wide eyes. Captain, we are receiving multiple hails from the Council fleet, and they are demanding our surrender. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and he cleared his throat with embarrassment. Ignore them, Daniel ordered without hesitation, and his attention remained focused on the tactical display. Helm, how long until we reach weapons range? Lieutenant Karen Price sat at the helm controls, and her hands were steady, despite the nervous energy that filled the bridge. 45 minutes, sir. She had plotted their course perfectly, and there would be no turning back once they entered engagement range. Daniel activated the ship-wide intercom, and his voice would reach every crew member from the engine room to the weapons bays to the medical stations. All hands, this is the captain, and in less than an hour we will engage the enemy, and they outnumber us hundreds to one, and they think we are fools for coming here. He paused to let his words sink in, and across the ship, people stopped what they were doing to listen. But they do not understand what drives us, and they do not understand that humanity's greatest strength is not our technology or our weapons, and it is our refusal to accept defeat, and it is our ability to look at impossible odds and say, watch us anyway. Today, we are not just fighting for revenge, and we are fighting to show the galaxy that humanity will not be pushed around, and we will not be erased, and we will not be forgotten. His voice grew stronger with each word, and the passion behind them was unmistakable. To your stations, and let us show them what humans are made of. Throughout the ship, the crew responded with a unified roar of determination that seemed to make the very bulkheads vibrate with sound. They were ready to face whatever came next, and they would do it together. The Council fleet formed a massive defensive wall across the nexus point, and 300 warships positioned themselves in perfect military formation. Admiral Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched the tactical display with intense focus. Hundreds of officers from various alien species monitored their stations, and the tension in the command center was thick enough to cut with a blade. The human vessel has just entered sensor range, and the tactical officer announced with his voice carrying across the silent bridge. Designation is EDF Vengeance and class is unknown and length is approximately 2 kilometers and mass readings are unusual. Sir, unusual how? And Vextar demanded, as he leaned forward to examine the data streaming across his console. The numbers did not make sense and something about this human ship was fundamentally different from what they expected. The density is far higher than expected and either their hull is incredibly thick or they are carrying something extremely heavy inside. The tactical officer's confusion was evident, and he ran the scans 3 more times to verify the readings, but the results remained the same. Commander. Throck laughed from his position at the weapons station and his massive frame shook with amusement. Perhaps they have loaded their ship with rocks to throw at us, and how primitive can these humans be? Several other officers joined in the laughter, and the mood on the bridge lightened considerably. They had fought countless battles against various species, and none had ever posed a serious challenge to Council military might. The Vengeance emerged from the darkness of space like a predator stalking its prey, and its hull was matte, black and absorbed the light from nearby stars. Along its flanks, massive gun ports began to open and revealed weapon systems the Council had never encountered before. The ship moved with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large, and its approach was measured and deliberate. Scan complete, and the science officer reported while his fingers danced across his instruments. I am detecting multiple railgun batteries and missile pods, and there is an energy signature at the core of the ship I have never seen before, and the power output is astronomical. Vextar felt the first stirring of unease crawl up his spine like ice water. Open a channel and let me speak to this Captain Hayes. The communications officer worked quickly and established a connection between the 2 flagships. Daniel's face appeared on the view screen and his expression was calm and composed, and showed no fear of the overwhelming force arrayed against him. Admiral Vextar, and I know who you are, and you gave the order to destroy Colony 7. His voice was quiet but carried an edge that made several bridge officers shift uncomfortably. It was a military necessity, and Vextar replied coldly while trying to maintain his authority. Your people refused to acknowledge Council authority in that sector, and we had to make an example. He had given that order without hesitation 3 years ago, and he would make the same decision again if required. The Council's power had to be maintained at all costs. Those were civilians and families, and you murdered them. Daniel's voice remained quiet, but the rage beneath it was palpable and every word was carefully controlled. I have come to collect the debt. The silence that followed was deafening, and Vextar realized this human captain was not bluffing or posturing. This was a man who had come for revenge. You and what army human, and look around you and my fleet will tear your ship apart. Vextar tried to sound confident, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. 300 warships surrounded the Vengeance, and by all military logic, this battle should be over before it began. The human ship should surrender or be destroyed within minutes. I do not need an army, and Daniel said simply, while his gray eyes remained fixed on the Admiral. I have something better, and I have human engineering and human determination and human fury, and you are about to learn the difference. The transmission ended abruptly and the view screen went dark. Vextar stared at the blank screen for a moment before shaking himself from his momentary paralysis. All ships open fire, Vextar commanded, and his voice echoed across the fleet communication channels. 300 warships unleashed their weapons simultaneously, and the space between the 2 forces filled with deadly energy. Plasma beams and particle weapons and kinetic missiles all converged on the single human vessel. It was enough firepower to level a continent or crack a moon in half. The Vengeance's shields flared to life and created a shimmering blue barrier that seemed to drink in the incoming fire like a sponge absorbing water. The energy attacks dissipated harmlessly against the shield matrix, and the physical projectiles bounced off as if hitting solid bedrock. On the Eternal Dominion's bridge, the weapons officer stared at his console in disbelief. Direct hits confirmed, but no damage detected, and their shields are holding at 98%. His voice trembled slightly, and the implications of what he was seeing began to sink in. On the Vengeance's bridge, Lieutenant Greg Sanders reported from his weapons station with barely contained excitement. Shields holding at 98% and negligible damage, sir. The defensive systems were performing exactly as designed, and the 3 years of research and development had paid off. Their weapons are impressive, but they are designed to fight each other, and Lisa noted while studying the tactical readouts. They have never faced human defensive technology. Daniel nodded and gave the order they had all been waiting for. Let us show them what human offensive technology looks like, and all railgun batteries fire at will and target their capital ships first. The command rippled through the weapons systems, and the Vengeance's main guns roared to life. Each railgun launched a 3-ton slug at relativistic speeds, and the projectiles crossed the distance in seconds. When they hit, the results were catastrophic beyond anything the Council had anticipated. The first round struck a Krillian battlecruiser dead center, and the kinetic energy did not just pierce the hull but passed completely through the ship. The sheer force created a shockwave that tore the vessel in half like paper, and secondary explosions rippled along its length as atmosphere vented and power cores ruptured. The battlecruiser broke apart in a brilliant explosion that lit up the surrounding space. Direct hit on the Crimson Fang, and the tactical officer on the Eternal Dominion reported with shock clear in his voice. The ship has been destroyed and complete structural failure. Before Vextar could respond, 5 more Council ships suffered the same fate, and each one torn apart by the devastating power of human railguns. The precision was terrifying, and every shot found its mark, and every impact resulted in total annihilation. Evasive maneuvers, and Vextar shouted while gripping his command console. All ships scatter formation and break up the defensive line. The Council fleet began to scatter, but their movements were slow and predictable compared to the Vengeance's fire control systems. The human ship's artificial intelligence predicted enemy movements with uncanny accuracy and adjusted targeting solutions in microseconds. Launching missiles, and Greg announced with grim satisfaction. Full spread and smart munitions deployed. Hundreds of missiles erupted from the Vengeance's launch tubes and streaked toward the Council fleet. These were not ordinary warheads, and each missile carried a micro-fusion device surrounded by a shell of depleted uranium fragments. When they detonated, they created miniature stars that burned at millions of degrees. A squadron of Sauron destroyers tried to intercept the missiles with point defense systems, and their weapons blazed away at the incoming projectiles. They managed to destroy perhaps a third of them, but the rest found their targets with deadly precision. The fusion detonations lit up space like a string of suns, and when the light faded, twisted wreckage was all that remained of 12 warships. Debris tumbled through space, and escape pods scattered in all directions. This is impossible, and Commander Throck stared at his console in disbelief. No single ship should have this much firepower, and we are losing vessels by the dozen. His warrior pride was crumbling as he watched his fellow soldiers die in droves. The Brutarian Legion had never retreated from battle, but they had never faced an enemy like this. Fall back, and Vextar ordered, while his voice cracked with strain. Reform at defensive perimeter Beta, and we need to regroup. The Council fleet began to retreat and tried to put distance between themselves and the human battleship. Ships collided with each other in their panic, and the perfect military formation dissolved into chaos. But Daniel was not about to let them regroup and reorganize. Helm all ahead full and close the distance, and Daniel commanded while his eyes never left the tactical display. Engineering, I need maximum power to the engines. In the engine room, Paul Martinez grinned like a madman, and his hands flew across the controls. You heard the captain and Amy take the reactor to 125% and let us see what this baby can really do. The Singularity core pulsed with barely contained power and energy readings, spiked across every monitor in engineering. The Vengeance surged forward and accelerated far faster than any ship its size should be capable of moving. Within minutes, it had closed the gap with the retreating Council fleet, and the hunters had become the hunted. They are trying to run, and Lisa observed while tracking the enemy vessels. That is a mistake, and now they have turned their backs to us. Fire all forward batteries and let us. The Council fleet was in complete chaos, and ships collided with each other in their desperate attempts to flee from the human battleship. Communication channels flooded with panic and confusion, and orders contradicted each other as different commanders tried to take control. Admiral Vextar tried to restore order from his flagship, but fear had taken hold of the fleet like a disease. This is Admiral Vextar to all ships, and form up on my position, and we need coordinated fire to bring down their shields. His voice carried authority, but it could not overcome the terror that gripped his forces. But coordination was impossible now, and the human battleship moved through their formations like a shark through a school of fish. The Vengeance picked off targets with ruthless efficiency, and each shot claimed another victim. Explosions bloomed across the battlefield like deadly flowers, and the vacuum of space swallowed the screams of dying crews. Commander Throck watched ship after ship disappear from his tactical display and his pride wounded beyond measure. "Admiral, I am taking my squadron in for a close-range assault, and if we can get past their shields, our boarding parties can take the ship from within." Throck's voice was desperate but determined, and he refused to accept defeat. The Brutarian way was to fight until death, and retreating was not an option for his people. He began plotting an attack vector that would bring his ships alongside the human vessel. Negative and fall back with the rest of the fleet, and that is an order. Vexter shouted, but Throck had already cut the connection. His heavy assault carrier, the Warbringer, along with 8 support frigates, broke formation and accelerated toward the Vengeance at full burn. The engines glowed white-hot as they pushed beyond safety limits, and the ships charged forward like ancient cavalry. On the human ship's bridge, Lieutenant Karen Price called out a warning while her hands moved quickly across her console. "Captain, we have multiple contacts breaking from the main fleet, and 9 ships on an intercept course, and they are moving fast." The tactical display showed the Brutarian squadron closing rapidly, and their weapons already firing as they approached. Daniel studied the tactical display with calm assessment, and his mind calculated possibilities in seconds. "They are going to try boarding us and cute attempt, and Lisa alert the Marine contingent, and Greg hold fire until they are within 5 kilometers, and I want to make sure we get all of them." The trap was set, and now they just had to wait for the enemy to spring it. The Brutarian ships came in hard and fast with their weapons blazing continuous fire at a single point on the human shields. They focused all their firepower on one section, hoping to create a breach they could exploit. The human shields held, but the concentrated assault was showing results, and the shield strength in that sector dropped to 70%, then 60, then 50. "They are committing everything to this attack," and Lisa noted while monitoring the shield status. "If they get through, our hull armor might not hold." "They will not," and Daniel said calmly without taking his eyes off the display. "Greg, activate the point defense grid and let us give them a proper welcome." The Vengeance's hull bristled with thousands of small turrets, and each one mounted rapid-fire laser cannons. The point defense system had been dormant until now, but it was about to prove its worth. When the Brutarian ships closed to 5 kilometers, the point defense system came alive all at once. It was like flying into a wall of solid light, and thousands of laser beams crisscrossed the space between the ships. The smaller frigates disintegrated almost instantly, and their hulls shredded by the sheer volume of fire. Metal vaporized in atmosphere, exploded outward, and the ship simply ceased to exist. The Warbringer's heavier armor allowed it to survive, longer but not by much, and its shields collapsed under the relentless assault. Throck watched in horror as his escorts were torn apart around him, and his bridge crew died at their stations. "All power to forward shields and ram them if we have to." His voice was hoarse with desperation, and he knew this was a suicide run, but he would not die running away. But before the carrier could close the final distance, the Vengeance fired a single railgun round at point-blank range. The slug hit the Warbringer's bow and punched through the entire length of the ship like a hot knife through butter. It exited through the stern engines and left a perfectly circular hole 3 meters wide. The carrier's reactor went critical a second later, and the resulting explosion was visible from the other side of the solar system. "Scratch 9 more," and Greg reported with no emotion in his voice. "The rest of the fleet is still running, sir, and they are spreading out across multiple vectors." The Council forces had abandoned all pretense of military discipline, and each ship was fleeing on its own course. Some headed for the outer planets, while others tried to reach the system's edge where they could jump to faster than light travel. "Good, and let them run and let them spread. The word about what happened here, and Daniel said while his eyes tracked the fleeing vessels. "But we are not done yet, and I want their flagship and helm pursue the Eternal Dominion." The Vengeance changed course with surprising agility for such a massive ship and set its sights on Admiral Vextar's command vessel. The massive dreadnought was desperately trying to reach the edge of the system, and its engines burned at maximum output. Vextar knew he was being hunted, and the knowledge filled him with cold dread. "Engineering. I need more speed, and we have to reach the jump point." His chief engineer's voice came back strained and apologetic. "We are already at maximum, Admiral, and the engines cannot take any more without risking catastrophic failure. Then redirect power from weapons and shields and everything to the engines," Vextar ordered while watching the human ship gaining on them. It was a desperate gamble, but staying to fight meant certain death. The Eternal Dominion's weapons went dark, and its shields flickered and died as all power was channeled to propulsion. The great ship surged forward, but it was not enough. The Vengeance was gaining with every passing second, and its superior engines closed the gap relentlessly. Within 20 minutes, the human battleship had closed to firing range, and Daniel gave his next order. Captain and Lisa said quietly while turning to face him, "If we destroy their flagship, we will have killed the Council's military leadership, and this will be an act of war that cannot be undone." Her concern was genuine, and she wanted him to understand the implications. Daniel's expression was carved from stone and showed no mercy or doubt. "They started this war 3 years ago when they killed our people, and we are just finishing it in fire." The Vengeance's weapons spoke again, but this time, Daniel ordered precision strikes rather than overwhelming destructive force. The railgun rounds targeted the Eternal Dominion's engines and weapons with surgical accuracy. One by one, the dreadnought systems failed under the precise assault, and its engines went dark first. The massive ship began to drift as it lost propulsion, and then its weapons were systematically destroyed. Its shields collapsed completely, and its communication arrays were blown apart. Within 10 minutes, the mighty flagship was reduced to a powerless hulk drifting in space. "Hail them," and Daniel ordered while his face remained impassive. The communications officer worked his console and established a connection to the crippled vessel. Vextar's face appeared on the view screen, and the Admiral looked aged and defeated. Lines of exhaustion marked his features, and his 4 eyes were dull with the weight of failure. "You have won, Captain Hayes, and my fleet is destroyed, and what more do you want?" Vextar's voice was barely above a whisper, and all his earlier arrogance had evaporated. He had sent thousands of soldiers to their deaths and accomplished nothing except proving human superiority. "I want you to listen very carefully," and Daniel said while leaning forward. "Today you learned that humanity will not be intimidated, and we will not be bullied, and we will not allow our people to be slaughtered without consequence." His words were measured but carried the weight of absolute conviction. "This battleship represents just a fraction of what Earth is now capable of, and we have spent 3 years rebuilding and researching and preparing. You attacked us when we were weak and scattered, and never again." Daniel continued, and his gray eyes burned with intensity. "So what now?" and Vextar asked bitterly. "You will execute me and my crew and make us martyrs for the Council cause." He had accepted his fate and waited for the final blow. "No," and Daniel replied with cold calculation. "I am going to let you live, and I want you to return to the Council and tell them exactly what happened here. Tell them that the Vengeance destroyed over 200 warships without suffering significant damage, and tell them that this is what happens when they threaten humanity." He paused to let the words sink in and watched the Admiral's face carefully, and tell them that if they ever attack another human world, we will not send just one battleship. Next time, and we will send a fleet, and we will not stop until every Council world is ashes. The threat hung in the air like a guillotine blade, and Vextar understood that this human captain meant every word. "You have 1 hour to evacuate your crew to life pods, and after that I am going to put one final railgun round through your ship's reactor, and the explosion will serve as a beacon, a reminder to every species in this galaxy that humans are not prey, and we are the predators now." The transmission ended and left Vextar staring at a blank screen. Across the remains of the news of the battle spread across the galaxy at the speed of light communications and reached every Council homeworld within days. On the Council homeworlds, the reports were initially dismissed as impossible lies and propaganda. A single human ship could not possibly have defeated 300 warships, and the numbers simply did not make sense. It had to be exaggeration or some kind of technical error in the reports. But then the survivors returned home, and Admiral Vextar and thousands of crew members in their escape pods were picked up by Council rescue vessels. Their testimonies were all identical and could not be dismissed or ignored. The human battleship had been a monster beyond comprehension, and a leviathan of destruction that had torn through their fleet like it was made of paper. Officers who had served for decades broke down while describing what they had witnessed. The Council convened an emergency session in their great chamber, and representatives from all member species gathered. Ambassador Lyra, who had witnessed the battle from a safe distance, presented her report to the assembled leaders. "The human ship was unlike anything we have encountered, and their weapons and their shields and their propulsion. All of it was generations ahead of our own technology." Her crystalline form pulsed with agitation as she spoke, and several councilors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "And they did this in just 3 years, and 3 years since we destroyed their colony, and they did not just rebuild, and they evolved. Lyra continued, and her voice carried both admiration and fear. The implications were staggering, and if humans could advance so rapidly, then they posed a threat unlike any the Council had faced before. Counselor Zephyrim, who had laughed at the human threat, was notably silent, now, and his reptilian features showed shame. Another representative named Klexith from an insectoid species spoke up with clicking mandibles. How is this possible? And our intelligence indicated that humans were a relatively primitive species and they had only achieved faster than light travel 50 years ago. The question hung in the air and no one had a satisfactory answer. That is what makes them so dangerous, and Lyra replied, while her form shimmered with emphasis. Humans do not just adapt, and they innovate, and they took the wreckage from our attack on Colony 7 and reverse-engineered our technology, and then they improved upon it. The reactor powering their battleship alone generates more energy than most of our star stations. She had studied the sensor readings carefully, and the power output was almost unbelievable. Then, we have no choice, and a representative from the Brutarian Legion growled while his massive frame tensed with aggression. We must strike at Earth itself before they build more of these vessels and a full invasion with all Council forces. His species had lost the most ships in the battle, and the desire for revenge burned hot in his chest. That would be suicide, and Admiral Vexitar said quietly from his position at the military advisory panel. He looked like he had aged a decade in the past few days, and the weight of his failure pressed down on him. If one ship could do this, imagine what an entire fleet could accomplish, and the human captain made it clear that they have more ships. And this was just their opening move. The room fell silent as his words sank in. So what are you suggesting? And Counselor Zephyrim demanded with frustration clear in his voice. That we simply accept this humiliation, and that we bow to a species we thought we could crush. His pride was wounded, but fear was beginning to override it. The old certainties about Council supremacy were crumbling. I am suggesting we do not underestimate them again, and Vextar replied with finality. Ever. The word hung in the air like a death sentence, and the Council chamber erupted in heated debate. Some called for immediate retaliation, while others urged caution, and the unity that had always defined the Council began to fracture. Meanwhile, the vengeance was making its way back to Earth, and the journey would take several weeks, even at faster than light speeds. The crew used the time to perform repairs and take inventory and process what they had just accomplished. In the mess hall, Lieutenant Greg Sanders sat with a group of junior officers, including Kate Williams and Chris Taylor. The mood was strange and mixed celebration with exhaustion and disbelief. I still cannot believe we did it, and Chris said while shaking his head. 300 ships and we should all be dead right now. He stared at his food tray without eating, and his hands trembled slightly. The adrenaline had worn off, and now the reality of what they had survived was setting in. The captain knew what he was doing, and Kate replied with conviction in her voice. Every move was calculated, and he never panicked and never hesitated, and that is what got us through. She had served under Daniel for 2 years and trusted him completely. The man had ice in his veins and steel in his spine. Greg nodded slowly, but his expression remained troubled. Yeah, but it does not feel like a victory, does it? And we killed a lot of people today, and tens of thousands, probably more. And they were following orders just like we were. The moral weight of their actions was beginning to settle on the crew, and not everyone could handle it easily. They destroyed Colony 7, and Kate said sharply while her eyes flashed with anger. My aunt lived there, and she was a teacher at the primary school. And when the Council attacked, she was reading stories to her students, and the whole building was vaporized. Her voice cracked slightly, and grief mixed with rage. So no, I do not feel bad about what we did today, and they earned this. In the engine room, Paul Martinez was reviewing. The reactor data with Amy Ross and the Singularity Core had performed beyond their wildest expectations, but there were concerns that needed to be addressed before the next engagement. The containment field showed some fluctuations during peak output, and Amy pointed out while highlighting sections of data. Nothing dangerous, but if we had pushed any harder, we could have had problems. We would have turned into a black hole and taken half the system with us. And Paul finished with a grim smile. Yeah, I know. But we did not, and that is what matters, and still I am recommending. We do not exceed 120% output in the future, and let us not test our luck. The reactor was powerful, but it was also dangerous, and pushing it too far could kill them all in an instant. On the bridge, Daniel stood alone and stared out at the stars streaming past. Lisa found him there hours later, and he was still in the same position. "You should get some rest, sir," and she suggested gently while approaching quietly. The captain had not left the bridge since the battle ended, and exhaustion lined his face. "Cannot sleep," and Daniel admitted without turning around. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Colony 7 burning, and I see my brother's face when I found his body in the rubble, and he was protecting his daughter and trying to shield her from the blast, and it did not matter, and they both died instantly." His voice was hollow, and the pain of that memory would never fully heal. Lisa was quiet for a moment before speaking, and she chose her words carefully. "We avenged them today, Daniel, and we avenged all of them." She wanted to comfort him, but knew that some wounds could not be healed with words. The captain carried the weight of 200,000 dead on his shoulders. Did we and Daniel turn to face her with haunted eyes? Or did we just ensure that more people will die in the war we have started, and the Council will not ignore this, and they cannot, and we have humiliated them and killed thousands of their people and destroyed hundreds of their ships, and they will retaliate, and when they do, more humans will die. The cycle of violence seemed endless. Then we will be ready for them, and Lisa said firmly while meeting his gaze. The vengeance is not alone anymore, and while we were gone, 3 more battleships came online, and the Retribution and the Defiance and the Liberty and Earth shipyards are working around the clock, and by the end of the year we will have a dozen ships like this, and by next year 50. Humanity was preparing for total war. Daniel nodded slowly and absorbed her words. And if that is not enough, the question hung between them, and both knew the answer might be that nothing would ever be enough. War had a way of consuming everything in its path. Then we build 100 or 1,000, and however many it takes to keep Earth safe, and Lisa put a hand on his shoulder. "We did not start this war, Captain, but we are going to make sure we finish it on our terms." Her conviction was absolute, and she believed every word. 3 weeks later, the Vengeance entered Earth's solar system, and as they approached the home planet, they were joined by an escort. Dozens of smaller vessels, including destroyers and frigates and patrol craft, formed an honor guard. The fleet welcomed home the ship that had changed everything and had proven that humanity could stand against any threat. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission from Fleet Command," and Chris reported from his station. "Admiral Peterson wants to speak with you." Daniel straightened his uniform and composed himself for the conversation ahead. "Put him through," and he ordered. The Admiral's weathered face appeared on the view screen, and he looked tired but determined. "Captain Hayes, on behalf of Earth and all of humanity, I want to thank you and your crew for your service, and what you accomplished was nothing short of miraculous." His voice carried genuine gratitude and respect. "We did what needed to be done, sir," and Daniel replied with simple honesty. "Indeed you did, and now we need you to do more," and Peterson's expression grew serious. "The Council has been making noise, and our intel." The Vengeance arrived at Earth to a hero's welcome, and crowds gathered at every viewing station to catch a glimpse of the legendary ship. The vessel docked at the newly constructed Orbital Defense Station Alpha, and the massive structure served as both a military base and a symbol of humanity's determination. Daniel and his crew were shuttled down to the surface, where they were met by thousands of cheering humans who lined the streets. News of their victory had spread across all of Earth's colonies, and the ship that had avenged Colony 7 had become a legend overnight. Children wore replica uniforms and carried toy models of the Vengeance, and adults spoke in hushed tones about the battle at the Nexus. But Daniel found no joy in the celebration, and his mind remained focused on what was coming next. Attended the mandatory ceremonies, and gave the required speeches, but his heart was not in it. He shook hands with politicians and accepted medals from military officials and smiled for cameras, but inside, he felt hollow. He knew the Council would respond, and when they did, the Vengeance's actions would seem like a small skirmish compared to what was coming. He was proven right 3 months later when intelligence reports began flooding into Fleet Command. The Council was assembling the largest fleet in their history, and 5,000 warships from a dozen species were gathering at staging points. They called it the Purge Fleet, and its mission was simple and direct: erase humanity from the galaxy and make an example that would be remembered for generations. But humanity had not been idle during those 3 months, and Earth's shipyards had worked day and night without pause. When the Purge Fleet arrived at the edge of human space, they found themselves facing not one battleship, but 12. The Vengeance led a battle group that included the Retribution and the Defiance and the Liberty and 9 other Vessels of equal power and capability. Behind them, Earth's orbital defenses bristled with weapons, and thousands of automated defense platforms surrounded the planet. Missile batteries and energy cannons and railgun emplacements created overlapping fields of fire that nothing could survive. The humans had transformed their homeworld into an impregnable fortress. Admiral Peterson now commanded the defense from Orbital Defense Station Alpha, and his hair had gone completely gray in the past 3 months. He sent a transmission to the Council fleet, and his voice was calm but firm. "This is Admiral Jack Peterson of the Earth Defense Force, and you have entered human space without authorization, and turn back now or we will be forced to engage." The warning was clear and carried no room for negotiation. The Council's response came from a new admiral named Rathkar from the Sauron Collective. His scaled face filled the view screen and dripped with contempt and arrogance. "Humanity's time is over, and we will not be threatened by an upstart species that does not know its place and surrender Earth now, or we will take it by force and enslave any survivors." His words were meant to inspire fear, but they only strengthened human resolve. Peterson's expression did not change, and his eyes remained cold. "Then I guess we are doing this the hard way, and all ships weapons free, and show them what humanity is made of." The order rippled across the human fleet, and every weapon system came online simultaneously. The wait was over, and the real war was about to begin. The Battle of Earth lasted 14 hours and changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The human battleships carved through the Council fleet with devastating efficiency, and each ship fought with the fury of a cornered animal. The Vengeance led the charge, and Daniel commanded his vessel, with the same cold precision he had shown at the Nexus. Earth's orbital defenses created kill zones that no Council ship could survive, and automated targeting systems tracked hundreds of targets simultaneously. Missiles streaked through space in swarms, and energy beams crisscrossed the battlefield like deadly spiderwebs. Human fighters, small and agile, swarmed the enemy vessels like angry hornets, and their pilots were fearless. And then humanity revealed its secret weapon that no one had anticipated. The planetary defense grid activated, and massive railguns built into the surface of Earth itself began firing. These weapons were larger than anything mounted on ships and could fire projectiles into orbit with pinpoint accuracy. The Council had nothing that could match such devastating firepower. A Krillian dreadnought tried to break through the orbital defenses and make a run at Earth itself. 3 planetary railguns fired simultaneously, and the projectiles hit the vessel from different angles. The dreadnought simply disintegrated under the impact and scattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The message was clear, and Earth could not be taken by force. The Council fleet pressed their attack with desperate determination, and they had committed everything to this offensive. But human technology and human tactics proved superior at every turn. The battleships moved in coordinated patterns and supported each other perfectly. When one ship's shields weakened, another would move to cover it, and the fleet fought as a single organism. By the 6th hour, the Council fleet had lost over 1,000. Ships and their formations were breaking apart. By the 10th hour, 3,000 ships were destroyed, and the survivors were trying to retreat. Admiral Rathkar refused to accept defeat, and ordered his remaining forces to continue the assault. It was a fatal mistake that cost thousands more lives. The Vengeance targeted Rathkar's flagship, and Daniel gave the order without hesitation. "All batteries fire and end this." The combined firepower of the human battleship struck the Sauron command vessel and tore it apart in seconds. The admiral died without knowing what hit him, and his flagship became an expanding cloud of debris. With their leader dead, the Council fleet finally broke completely, and the survivors fled in disorder. Their mighty purge fleet had been reduced to a few hundred damaged vessels limping away from the slaughter. Humanity had won the greatest naval battle in galactic history, and the cost had been high but acceptable. Humanity lost 47 ships in the battle, and 12,000 personnel gave their lives defending Earth. Memorial services were held across the planet, and each name was read aloud and remembered. It was a steep price, but they had won, and Earth remained free. The aftermath of the Battle of Earth sent shockwaves across the galaxy that could not be ignored. The Council, humiliated and broken, sued for peace within days. The treaty negotiations were tense, but humanity's position was clear and non-negotiable. They wanted to be left alone and no interference with human colonies and no restrictions on human expansion, and most importantly, acknowledgement of Earth as a sovereign power. The Council agreed to all terms because they had no choice, and their military was shattered. Their political unity was fractured beyond repair, and member species began forming their own alliances. The old order that had dominated the galaxy for centuries was ending, and a new era was beginning. 5 years later, Daniel stood on the bridge of the Vengeance once more, and the ship had been upgraded and refitted multiple times. It was faster and stronger and more deadly than ever, but it had not fired a shot in anger since the Battle of Earth. The mere presence of the human battle fleet was enough to deter any aggression. "Captain, we are receiving a transmission from Ambassador Lyra," and Chris reported from his station. "She is requesting permission to come aboard." Daniel raised an eyebrow with surprise, and the Council's ambassador had never visited a human ship before. "Grant it, and I will meet her in the conference room." 20 minutes later, Daniel sat across from the crystalline alien who had once warned her people about humanity's potential. She had aged in the intervening years, and her once bright surface was now dimmed with fatigue. "Captain Hazen," she began, with her voice carrying respect. "I wanted to meet the man who changed the galaxy. I was just doing my duty," and Daniel replied carefully while studying her. "Protecting my people and nothing more." He remained cautious around any council representative, even one who had shown some wisdom in the past. "You did more than that, and you showed the council that they were not invincible and that their empire was built on arrogance rather than actual superiority." Lyra's form pulsed gently and her words carried weight. "Many of us are grateful, actually, and the council had become tyrannical and crushing any species that did not fall in line, and your victory gave others the courage to demand better treatment. I did not fight for the council's other subjects," and Daniel said honestly, "I fought for humanity and for the people of Colony 7 and for everyone the council had wronged." His motivations had always been personal and driven by loss and anger. "I know, but change often comes from unexpected places." Lyra leaned forward slightly, and her crystalline form reflected the bridge lights. "I came here to deliver a message, and the council is dissolving, and not immediately but gradually, and the member species are forming their own alliances and their own paths forward, and the old order is ending." "And the new order?" and Daniel asked while leaning back in his chair. "The future of the galaxy was uncertain, and anything could happen now." "That remains to be seen. But I wanted you to know that humanity will have a seat at the table, and you have earned respect and fear and a place among the powers of the galaxy." She paused and her form dimmed slightly. Whether that is a good thing or not, only time will tell. After Lyra left, Daniel returned to the bridge where Lisa was waiting. What did she want? And Lisa asked with curiosity in her